Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family and readers. Dick and I are always so happy when we're joined with Henry Giroux, who currently holds the McMaster University Chair for Scholarship in the Public Interest in the English and Cultural Studies Department and is the Paulo Freire Distinguished Scholar in Critical Pedagogy. Boy, I just love that long title. But in addition to that long title, Henry has a new book out, and it is called The Burden of Conscience, Educating Beyond the Veil of Silence. And you can find that at www.henryagiroux.com, and we'll put a link. Henry, so good to see you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So you wrote an article. Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, so we just published your new article, Language and the Art of Fascist Politics. And part of it talks about how language has been contorted to support the wave of fascism that's enveloped our country and other countries, and how language has to change to combat that trend. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is not a new topic. I mean, people have been writing about language for a long time and how it tends to sustain both a democracy and how it both diminishes a democracy when it's taken over by right-wing authoritarian or fascist elements. But I think we're in a new era when language has taken on a more formidable meaning. And what I mean by that is in the past, we weren't bombarded by information that basically was in the hands of the corporate elite in the way we are today. And I think that what we're seeing is we're seeing the collapse of both civic literacy and literacy in general at a time when they're more important than ever. And so I was trying to resurrect this question around language, particularly in terms of the way it's been abused by the Trump administration in ways that suggest not only the need to indict Trump and his sycophants, but also the corporate media, and in some way the left. And I don't put those on an equal footing at all. The left is not responsible for what's going on here. Some people argue there's a left and the right. That's nonsense. But I think that the crisis of language mirrors what I call a crisis of ideas. And that is the crisis of politics is not matched by a crisis of ideas. We don't have a language that is fully capable of comprehending in its totality a system that has become so vicious, so cruel, that we're often afraid to both name it and to talk about its parallels with the past. So we need a new way of talking about this. I mean, Eddie Glad, who's is just brilliant, right? And I put this in the piece, the piece for you, as you know, and he says, and he was very passionate. He says, "Hey, look, let's be honest. This is white supremacy. Name it, white supremacy. We're not just talking about the deportation of some politicians who are white and middle class and somewhat on the left. We're talking about people in that regime who say things like Alcatraz is a good place because it's going to potentially eat up with the crocodiles 75 million people. They're talking about Latin Americans in the United States. They're talking about brown people. They're talking about black people. And I think that that's just one example. But I also think there's the need for more terms that are more courageous and more honest, not just in their shock value, but also in the images that they conjure up that create a kind of emotional value that link us to the language. Like for instance, in the piece you have, I use the word state terrorism. This is state terrorism. This is not politics on the right. Come on, right? This is not another politician. This is a fascist. This is not an attack on civil liberties. This is an attack on democracy in general. And so there are some of the things that I was trying to do. This was both a critical piece and a pedagogical piece because it tries to resurrect at this moment something that Paulo Freire was involved in his entire life, and that is the relationship between literacy and power.
Mm.
Power, not just critique, and power.
Mm-hmm.
to be literate to understand the problem. And if you don't understand it, you can't act on it.
That's
Let's
right.
be honest here. You can't just talk about economic structures, as important as they are
That's
in
right.
terms of what capitalism does to people. People have to be able to understand how those structures relate to their lives at the level of everyday life. So that when we talk about his budget, it's not enough to talk about, it gives so much here and so much there, and the rich get richer. How does it affect people's health care? How does it affect the future for their children? How does it affect the fact that poor children, thousands, will no longer have food in order to eat when they go to school? I mean, it's at that level of everyday life that a language of possibility and critique really has to emerge.
Absolutely. One of the things that I love about your work is that it is so comprehensive, but there is a but there. What I try to do is learn from what you provide, the information you provide, but then I try to regurgitate it and simplify it for people that I personally know will not read because the text is dense and complex from their perspective, not necessarily from your perspective, but from where they're coming. This is difficult text. So we've added the audit the audio the audio. We've added a glossary. Henry, a lot of that glossary are just words that you use in your everyday language, but they are not words that many of the people that I know, that I grew up with, use in their everyday language. So I just want to emphasize that it's important that we're able to present this information at various levels because it's so essential. We cannot pass up on understanding this. We must understand it in order to combat this oppression that we're faced with.
We can't we can't address the crisis that we're facing at this moment in the language of liberalism. We can't do it. We can't talk about individuals alone, you know,
No.
solving problems, right? We can't make the claim that, Robert Reich does this all the time. We need to save capitalism. No, we need to actually eliminate it. I'm sorry. Its basic values are awful. It doesn't begin with human beings. It begins with the market. Claims that the market is the template for all social relations. The only relations that matter are commercial. Get rid of it. It's destroying the planet. It's created massive and staggering degrees of inequality, and it basically generates wars for profit. And it's about the collapse of conscience, as I say in the new book. So it seems to me that to move away from those languages, and Sharon, I think you're absolutely right. That doesn't mean there's a universal language here that's indifferent to context. It means that that language has to work through different contexts and different levels to address different levels of literacy, understanding, and comprehension. I mean, to be a public intellectual, you have to use a different language when you talk to different audiences because you have to live in their world. You don't speak English to a group of people only speaking German. I mean, yeah, and that makes
So
no sense.
I love this because when I went to law school, one of the first things I learned is that going to law school doesn't really teach you concepts that you don't know. It teaches you a language that you don't know.
Yeah,
But the concepts themselves are concepts that we all understand. I mean, the concept of a basic contract, an offer acceptance, and consideration, those are legal terms that I've just used. But as a 5-year-old, I knew that if I offered candy to my friend next door and in exchange they give me 10 cents, I'd expect, and they say, I accept that offer. So now I expect the 10 cents and they expect the candy. That's a contract.
even building on that term, I mean, we don't use the term social contract anymore. You don't see it, you know, and yet it's unreal in terms of what its implications are, right? I mean, if you have a social contract in which the social dissolves, and solidarity dissolves, I mean, and as I say in the piece, and even empathy gets attacked, or the racist comments that come out of people's mouths are not, how might I say this, are not filtered back into the social contract. I mean, what does it mean to claim that only white people deserve citizenship? What kind of social contract is that? That's a
Yeah,
social contract. That's fascism, right? That's a social contract for fascism. I mean, and when we say a state is eliminating birthright citizenship or due process, do we have a term for that that ordinarily is not used? Yeah, it's called criminogenic. It's called terrorism, right? It's called fascism. I mean, it seems to me we need an emotional weight with a language that adequately captures the horror of the present moment, especially in a culture of immediacy. Information is not knowledge. It's not knowledge. It's just information. That's all. It's like 1,000 words being thrown out in the street, and they're just bouncing all over the place. And you have to pick a few to put a sentence together. We need knowledge. We need to be able to say, okay, how does language help us to work through this stuff so that we can have some sense of how history informs where we are, where we should be going, what knowledge says about what it means to construct a sense of individual agency, and how can we talk about power relations that are different and more treacherous now than they have been in the past, and what are the conditions that produce them? And finally, what's the culture that makes this possible? Right? I mean, all this, I mean, yes, I think the Epstein thing is interesting. It really should be analyzed in fundamental ways. But it seems to me that when you have a culture that's wedded to conspiracy theories, the issue is not whether Trump pushes these endlessly. The real issue is, where did that culture come from to create Trump? What role did language play? What role does theater play? What role does the spectacle play? What role does the media play? In other words, what are the instruments of agency at work that function through language and other symbols that basically are creating a culture of utter ignorance and stupidity? I mean, that's a fundamental question today.
Yeah, so the attack on literacy is continuing apace. I come from a family of teachers. All my uncles and my dad and my aunt were all professors. And look at what's happening now. I mean, Ron DeSantis is stripping a university in Florida of all of its real academic departments, replacing them with baseball teams. We're dissolving the Department of Education. I mean, who needs education?
Yeah.
And then the Trump administration is attacking all the elite universities, forcing professors to join you in Canada because they can't live under the intolerant conditions here. But there's a point to that. I mean, if everyday people don't have some education in cultural issues and legal issues, well, they're gonna fall for the okie doke. They're gonna be perfect souls to line up for jobs at Walmart and not much else. And I think there's a long-term plan to make that happen.
And there's also a plan to emphasize the importance of vocational education.
Right.
And while that is important, I don't think that it completely replaces having a depth of understanding of things that have nothing to do with hammering a nail.
Yeah, but I don't think the right wingers who are running the country right now want a lot of people to have any basic understanding of anything other than how to hammer a nail.
Look, I think there are three issues here that are really crucial. One is you have to remember that at one point, education was seen as a public good.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really central to creating active citizens who were informed and could make judgments, and we could hold power accountable. Let's begin with number one. That's dangerous. That's all. I mean, education is dangerous. I mean, and if it weren't dangerous, they wouldn't be going after it to the degree that they are. All the things that you both have just mentioned have to be understood that to suggest that education is so critical, right, and so important that they're going nonstop to completely dismantle it. So this is an attack really on any institution, whether it means erasing historical knowledge, obliterating libraries, banning books. It means that ideas matter. So we have to take them seriously rather than just say, that's terrible. That's a form of censorship. That's not a form of censorship. That's an invitation to regroup and reclaim education as central to democracy and politics. That's the first issue. Secondly, it seems to me that this attack on education has a history. And we don't want to forget this history. And, living in California and being much younger than me, but remembering that point when Ronald Reagan went after Angela Davis and actually went after higher education, saying it was turning out communist and Marxist and all this kind of nonsense, which is now being repeated, is something we want to remember because first it was the communists were there, then it was well, under Reagan, we really need to turn these places into training centers. This isn't about getting a job. It's about confusing education with training. Training is fine, but I don't want to train people who are stupid civically, right? Then they become dangerous,
Right.
Thirdly, it seems to me we have to again remember that if education is under attack in the way it is, and yet it's so important, and yet that attack reveals how crucial it is, then that's where we should be fighting, right? It's on the field of education that we should be fighting, with ideas, mobilizing people, waking people up. I wrote a piece in which I quote Edward Said, and I talk about that a pedagogy of wakefulness, coming alive and being able to see the connections, able to see the danger, and recognizing that you have to bring these different interest groups together so that we have a mass movement and not a bunch of sectarian groups who certainly are legitimate in exposing a wide variety of forms of repression. But unless we can mobilize under a notion of radical democracy, not capitalism, radical democracy, democratic socialism, at least in my estimation, we're in trouble. And I think that language is one avenue to get us there.
That's right. All right. So talk to us about what you mean when you say radical democracy. I can envision, I get a vision of that when you use those terms, but I want to hear from you. What do you mean by a radical democracy?
The first notion of radical democracy begins with the assumption that power should be in the hands of people. That's where it begins. It begins that people should have some control over the forces that govern their lives. It means that any notion of radical inequality in all of its forms has to be eliminated. It means that those public goods that are central to human life, housing, food, schools, should be nationalized. They shouldn't be run by private interest, right? It means that there should be certain goals that a country has that says poverty should not exist, homelessness should not exist, staggering inequality should not exist. People should have opportunities to develop their sense of individual and collective agency in ways that are parallel with the issues of justice, freedom, equality, free speech, and the right, in a sense, to make decisions that both inform our own lives and the public good. And I think those values basically then can be worked through in terms of what the institutional structures would look like that support them.
Right. So I get a sense that the so-called founding fathers, they use words that gave us a sense that they were proponents of radical democracy. But I think that was actually just a PR stunt. And they actually were in opposition. They stood in opposition to radical democracy.
My wife's Greek, so I learned a lot about Greek history, and she's brilliant about Greek history. In the polis, right, women couldn't vote. Blacks built the buildings that they argued in, right? That's not democracy. That's democracy without it. It's the lie of democracy. It's a democracy covering over its radical impulses and its radical possibilities. So we have to be able to be, again, we're back to language, right? I mean, that's capitalist democracy we're in today. That's not democracy. That's not radical democracy. Capitalist democracy means you can screw anybody you want, not have to worry about it. Don't be concerned with social responsibility. Amass as much money as you can and look to people like Elon Musk as heroes. I mean, that's about the slaughter of democracy in its own name.
Yes, absolutely.
That's democracy bleeding. It's bleeding out. Democracy right now is bleeding out. It can't even justify itself anymore in those terms. Remember, Trump and his cronies and his sycophants and his absolute moral cowards, they don't talk about democracy. They talk about illiberal democracy. They claim democracy has failed. That's why when even a guy like Musk, as stupid as he is in some ways, says, I don't believe in empathy. I think it's the bane of Western civilization. That's a language that has nothing to do with democracy. That's a language that has to do with concentration camps.
Mhm.
Right.
That's a language that says we should abandon our conscience in the interest of the accumulation of capital.
For some.
For some, of course.
Right.
Basically, for people who believe in white Christian nationalism. I'm
Right.
sorry. Let's be clear who these people are, right? It's funny. Trump said something the other day that I should have quoted that I love. He was talking about Stephen Miller, and he didn't realize what he said. He said, "Oh, Stephen Miller, he's a little harsh." He said, "If it was up to Miller, we wouldn't have 300 million people in this country. We'd have 100 million people who look like him."
I know. I heard him say it.
Isn't that perfect? I mean, there you are. I mean, he's got a white supremacist who's basically abducting people, torturing people. People are dying in, prisons like Alligator Alcatraz. Good Lord. And he thinks it's a joke. He sort of poses it as a joke while admitting that this guy is a white supremacist. I mean, okay.
Absolutely. I was shocked to see that sign, Alligator Alcatraz. It's an official sign.
Yeah, it is.
A state printed metal big sign. I thought, well, maybe, that was just sort of a nickname that people were using.
No. Yeah. But I think there are three things about that again, talking about the language of civic literacy that strike me as important, right? One, Alligator Alcatraz is a model for what's going to take place in other states, and they've said that, right? That now that they've got $760 billion or whatever it is, they'll be, and that's the first thing. Secondly, this is an economic issue, not just a political issue, in the sense of being a concentration camp of sorts, right? I mean, this is defense money. This is money going to private contractors all over the United States to build these things and to provide jobs. I mean, this would be basically for jobs. Thirdly, as Timothy Snyder said the other day, this is going to be a source of cheap labor in the United States.
Oh, it's
right?
it's going to be another return to slavery.
It's a return to slavery. It is the worst dimension of Jim Crow, and basically, and even worse, slavery itself. So that's how we have to understand these things. But see, that's the language of comprehension, right? We don't say, "Oh, it's a prison." We say, "Hey, look, this is part of what capitalism does. This is part of what it means to basically bring a whole range of issues together and understand what one of them means in its complexity as both a source of cheap labor, as part of the punishing state, and as a symbol of fear, just fear, right? And as a policy of what I would call disposability. It's the central policy now of disposability. This is a nation that is really ingrained in a politics of disposability.
So in one part, you talk about really the glorification of cruelty. Even Stephen Miller thought about only 100 million people that look like him. That's really cruel. That's really cruel to the other 230 million who don't look like him. And Trump has learned, and his people have learned, that you can say the nastiest things in the world, and if you don't back down from them, if you keep saying, it gaslights people so that a certain percentage of the people, and he really only needs 30% of the country to support him, it becomes he says things that in a different age, and he does things and in a different age would disqualify him from the public square. But he's learned that's the way to take over the public square, and we haven't really found a way to combat that nastiness. You can't combat it with its own nastiness, because then you're down in the gutter with Trump, and you don't want to be there.
Well, I think there are a couple of things, Dick. I think it's an important point, but I also think that not only is this a playbook that comes right out of the past, right? As you know, particularly with respect to Nazi Germany, but at the same time, what does it say about how power works to basically normalize this? It says that the media, in its claim to objectivity, in its claim to balance, is really an act of unbelievable journalistic cowardice. It refuses to name the problem. That's one issue, right? I mean, every time somebody refers to Trump, why don't they say, this is President Trump who has lied 30,000 times in 5 years? Uh, and begin there. I mean, why not raise these questions? And what does it mean for that to be normalized? How does that stuff get normalized? It gets normalized with the decline in education. It gets normalized with the rise of far right cultural institutions. It gets normalized with the attack on basically any critical institutions, and it gets normalized through the language of fear. People are afraid to basically combat that stuff now. Their professors, they get fired. Their teachers, they get fired. They're in the media, they get fired. I mean, NBC, CBS, I mean, they talk about the weather all the time. They're weather stations now. They have almost nothing. They have almost nothing to say. And they don't even talk about climate control. They just report tornadoes. And I mean, you watch this stuff and you think, this is worse than Orwell. I mean, this is worse than Huxley. This is like, it isn't like Big Brother watching you. It's like mass stupidity watching you and nourishing you, right? Stupidity has become a drug. It's now a drug, right? And the addiction is overwhelming in the culture.
Yes, it is. It is. Well, we say that as we sit here in Los Angeles, where our city has been occupied.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, and that's the language. Los Angeles is basically the model for occupation for a fascist state in the United States. It's the
Right.
model.
And
I mean,
they're waiting to see the success of this occupation
that's
so
right.
that they can go ahead and spread it elsewhere.
I mean, what they're really waiting for is for violence to break out in LA so that they can then they can declare martial law eventually. That's it. Trump is dying. He's salivating over a pretext for martial law, and he hates California for obvious reasons, right?
So there was an article yesterday in the New York Times interviewing some of the National Guard soldiers who were sent
Yeah,
home just recently, and how dispirited they were and how
yeah.
much they hated that job. And it's something like ordinarily 65% of the National Guard members re-up when their term ends. And now that number is down to 20%. So you're going to disembowel the California National Guard. And as a former soldier, I mean, I can't imagine, and 40% of California National Guards are Latinos. And, you can't, I mean, I think that's going to blow up in his face. There's only so many thugs that they can put in uniforms and send around our streets, I hope.
Well, I think the level of mass cruelty and mass violence that is being produced in the United States at this moment, and the way in which it's sort of showcased to sort of suggest an exaggerated sense of manliness and masculinity, toxic masculinity, is so overwhelming that it's becoming difficult to defend it, you know. And I think it's a great line from one Nobel Peace Prize winner who says, "Keep your eye on the red line. There's always in every country a red line that's crossed. And that red line has enormously historic consequences generally. And I think we're as close to a red line in the United States as one can imagine. And there is no question in my mind it's going to get worse. It'll get worse. But again, even watching somebody like Rachel Maddow on Monday nights, who is a pleasure to watch now. I mean, she's the only person that seems to have any guts anymore in mainstream media, right? Who is constantly reporting on sources of opposition all over the country, and we don't see it. I mean, it's just not in the mainstream media. According to the mainstream media, the only people who live in the United States are white Christian nationalists who support Trump and sort of come off on evangelical ecstasy, right? If I can put it that way, orgasmic evangelicals, bathing in cruelty, who are dying to shoot LGBTQ people in the head or have them murdered. Good Lord. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Well, once again, Henry, you've enlightened us. And also,
I don't mean to end that. That's not an attempt to end on a sour note because I really believe that the forces of resistance are mobilizing. I think that people are waking up. I think this question of education is coming to the surface. I think that even the universities are starting to fight back. And I think the real heroes here are the students who basically raised alarm about Gaza. And I think in many ways, the electricity of that protest movement has carried forth into other movements. And I'm hoping that it keeps going. And if it does, this nightmare will end soon.
Absolutely. Henry, it's a pleasure, as always, for you to join us. And we always look forward to your articles and just your wonderful contribution to the progressive community. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can't wait till next time, Henry. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.